Alright, today we're going to be replacing the front brakes on this 2014 Sierra. Now keep in mind that the process I go through, it's going to be the same or similar on most vehicles, okay? Now I'm putting Power Stop Evolution brake pads and drilled and slotted rotors, which actually have a left and a right side. Most other brands or standard rotors aren't going to have that, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I'll probably do the back as well, but I'll make a separate video for that, and I'll link to that at the end of this one, alright? Let's get started. Alright, so you can see I have the vehicle up off the ground, supported by the jack and the jack stand. The other thing I've done is I've loosened up the master cylinder cover, so when we push back the caliper, the fluid has some place to go. Alright, the first thing I'm going to do is remove these caliper pin bolts, okay? You can tell it's a pin bolt because it's got the boot here, okay? On this vehicle here, it's a 19 millimeter, okay? And it should come off relatively easily. Okay, there's one on the bottom as well. See if I can get you an angle of it here. Alright, the lower one's right here, and again you can tell because it has the boot. Just going to give it a couple gentle love taps here with a hammer, just to break it loose. You could also use a pipe or something just to get it going. Alright, so what we're going to do now is pry this caliper away from the bracket and the rotor. Let me move the camera real quick. Alright, so for this here, once we break it free, it should come off, but it can be kind of difficult to break free sometimes. There it goes right there. Alright, I'm going to use a second jack stand to set the caliper on, just so it's not hanging from the brake hose. You know, the brake hose itself isn't supporting all of the weight. Okay, set it out of the way here. Alright, next we're going to remove the caliper bracket itself, okay? Now I do want to mention that I knew these pads and these rotors are actually pretty good. One of my rotors has a slight warp to it, it's got a pulse, and the best thing about replacing any kind of car parts, now with these Facebook groups, you can sell these used car parts for, like, you know, sell them for almost nothing really, but you're going to get money back towards better or newer parts for your vehicle. And also I wanted to make a video on it, okay? So let's go ahead and get these off next. This one is going to be an 18 millimeter on the back of the bracket here. Let's move the camera. Alright, these are the caliper bracket bolts, 18 millimeter, and I can tell you on the other side, they were on there pretty good. So give it a couple of gentle love taps to see if we can break it free here. Alright, I'm going to spray that down so it winds in easier when we put it back together. Let's move on to the bottom one here. Alright, again it's 18 millimeter. And we'll give some gentle love taps here. Alright, if I had to guess, I would guess that this rotor is the one that's got a slight warp to it, and I'll show you why here in a minute. Of course, if I do sell these, even as used, I would indicate that the rotor would need to be turned. And I might even take my micrometer and take pictures showing that it's off by a little bit. Okay, let's take a look at the pads on this one, and this is the one that I think is probably warped. Alright, so look at this inner pad. There's supposed to be a groove going up through the pad like this one all the way, but this one is sort of run together, and it's also worn down more, so that could be an indication of a sticking caliper, but I don't think so. Based on the other side, obviously I did the other side first, my guess would be that the pads are not freely moving in these tin clips here, okay? And even I had a problem with the new pads, and let's see if we run into the same problem. I'll show you how I resolved it. So what we want to do is, the new kit I bought has new tins, pads, it has everything. Okay, it has grease, it has new boots, so I'm going to replace everything on this caliper bracket. Okay, I mean, there's still a lot of meat left on them, but for some reason, this one is worn down more than the other, and it's got a lot of buildup right there. So my guess would be that it just wasn't moving freely. So when the piston would relax, when you let off the brakes, the tension is supposed to relax, and this inner one probably wasn't relaxing enough. That would be my guess, okay? saying, again, it's not necessary to replace everything if everything's still in good shape, but because the kit came with everything, I'm going to replace even the boots. But certainly inspect the boots, and also you're going to want to add grease to the pins. So let me show you what I mean by that. Okay, that'll pull out, and you'd want to add new grease and then pop it back in place. But I'm going to replace those, okay? Before I actually grease it up, though, I want to take a wire brush and clean this all out so the new tins sit in there as close as possible, okay? Alright, so if you've inspected your boots and they're fine, it's not necessary to replace them. But because this kit included them, and I don't want to take it back apart just to do a pin boot, I'm going to do mine. Hey, that's what it looks like. Alright, so what I've done is I've sprayed the boot down a little bit, and I'm going to use a 21mm socket. Obviously, you want to find the right one for your boot. And I make sure I'm not pinching it at all. Try to get it in there straight. Alright, with the boots in, I'm just going to take these pins, clean up some of the old grease, put fresh grease on them. And I also put grease down in the pinholes as well. Alright, so the other thing that may happen with the grease is you may get like an airlock. What you might have to do is take your thumb and peel the boot back a little bit to let the air out. Alright, we're going to snap these spring clips in here, and they're kind of spring tabs, so you're going to want to center it and then pop it in place. You can feel it snap on. Okay, the other side. And a good thing to do is obviously pay attention to the way that the old ones came off, so you don't have to guess, but basically these ones here have this top lip, and it's pretty obvious how they go. And that one's on a little bit crooked. Okay. Alright, once you get the tins in place, get them on there straight and as close to the caliper bracket as you can. You're going to want to apply some grease, some brake grease. This little kit came with a package, but you can buy these usually at the auto parts counters. You can get them for like, I don't know, like 99 cents or something, which is ridiculous for as much grease as comes in there, but it's a thicker consistency than what you'd find like in a grease gun or bearings, bearing grease. And that's because obviously you don't want to spread and get on the brake pads or the caliper. So basically apply it to the inside here where the corners of the brake pads make contact. Now I mentioned on the other side I had a difficult time with one of the pads, and I've run into it before. And that's because corrosion builds up here, and you put these new tins on and they don't sit as closely as maybe the ones you took off. So what you can try to do is, obviously we took a wire brush and cleaned it up, and then you can, if you're really having a hard time getting these in there and getting them straight, file these down just a little bit, or use a grinder or file something. You only want to take a little bit off because you do want these to move freely, and I honestly think that was the problem with this one. Okay, it just wasn't moving freely, so you'd release the brakes and it wouldn't release. It wouldn't pull back far enough, okay? So this one here, again, with the curved bottom on this set, is the outer one. Remember, this is the inner side, so this would be the outer, okay? And obviously the pad faces inward. Okay? And then this is the inner one. Now you don't want them like sloppy loose, but you do want them to be able to move, right? So if you get it in there and you have to pry it to get that in there, don't put it back together that way, because you could actually warp your brand new rotor, right? They can be a bugger. Alright. So that's what we're looking for, okay? And you'll notice, I'm not going to remove them, but they move freely, okay? Alright, so that's what you're looking for. Alright, let's remove the rotor. This one's got a T30 Torx right here, okay? Not all rotors have that set up, but this one does. I'm just going to take a pipe and try to wedge it up in here to keep this from spinning. Got a little bit socket on my 1/4 inch ratchet here. You could probably use a screwdriver bit. It's not in there too awful tight. Okay, that's what it looks like. Now if your rotor is stuck to the hub assembly, you can actually thread some bolts in here and do it evenly, a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time, and it'll force this rotor off. This one is actually loose, so we don't need to do that. Okay, but you can see what I mean here. It's got some threads in there, and it'll push against this back plate. Okay, now we will want to make sure that we match up the new rotor so we can thread that T30 Torx back in. All right, let me get the new rotor. All right. Alright, let's pop that back in. We're on the home stretch here. Now again, these slotted rotors have a side. Okay, this one says front driver side, so you want to pay attention to that. But I will tell you that this is the first time I've actually bought what you'd call performance brakes. A lot of times I just use you know, the Delco Advantage series or Bendix or, you know, Wagner. So you don't have to go all out, and those rotors have held up fine. I usually do spend a little bit more on the pads. I usually do go with ceramic pads anyways. But the rotors, I've bought some cheap ones and they've held up fine, you know. Alright. That just holds that in place, okay? So we can get the caliper bracket back on. And speaking of that, let's do it right now. Alright, so we have this bracket. It's fully loaded. I've got the pads in. I've got the tins all greased up. Got new boots. And these were the 18mm bolts, kind of the coarse thread. And we just get one started here. And I greased them up so they're going in much easier than they came out, which is always nice. Alright, let me get the other side before I go too far. This is the bottom one. I don't think you need to see it. Okay, so you could look up the torque specs, but for these you obviously want to make sure that they don't fall off, but you want to be able to get them off again, and you don't want to break anything. That's the torque spec. Alright, so we need to push back the caliper piston. Let's do that next. Alright, again we have my caliper sitting on the jack stand back here because you don't want to hang, you know, the weight of the caliper on the brake hose alone. Okay, so I'm just going to spin it around here so we can take a look. Okay, these are the caliper pistons, and what I'm going to do is take one of the old pads, and because I might turn around and sell these, I'm going to kind of be delicate about it. I'm going to take a C-clamp, and I'm going to back it out a little bit. Okay, this is why we loosened up the master cylinder cover. Okay, so I'm going to push this back. And if it goes too difficult, you know, if it's difficult to push back, don't force it. Alright, if you're doing rear brakes, it could be because there's an emergency brake mechanism that they need to wind back. But on the front brakes, if it doesn't go, then what you might need to do is crack your bleeder valve. And if it doesn't go after you crack your bleeder valve, you could have, you know, a stuck caliper, okay? Which can also cause, you know, your rotor to warp, okay? And your pads are going to wear unevenly as well, okay? Similar to what we saw, but usually much more exaggerated, okay? Alright, there we go. Let's pop that on here. Make sure your brake hose is not twisted. Alright, just going to pop these in. These again with those fine thread bolts. Okay, and obviously you want to tighten them down so that they're not going to fall out, but so you'll be able to get them out again and not break anything. I'm going to go ahead and finish up. Basically what we need to do is tighten these down you need to put your master cylinder cover back on. If you lost any fluid, you're going to want to check that after you take it for a drive. Before you take it for a drive, you're going to want to pump your brakes really well. Make sure you have a good solid, pedal, and then just make sure your vehicle's going to stop before you sort of head out into the street. I will mention too that because your new pads have a lot more meat on them, these pins got to have to slide in all the way. If you get a little bit of an airlock, like I mentioned before, peel the boot back just a little bit, and that pin will compress in there. Okay. So thanks for watching. Don't forget, torque your wheels down. 90 pounds is what I do. If you have questions, leave them down below. Comments are always appreciated. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see more of this type of stuff. And thanks for watching. Remember, this is going to be very similar on a lot of different vehicles. Yours may have different size bolts. The caliper may look different, but it's going to be similar, okay? And if you have a question, leave it down below. Thanks for watching. Have fun.